Lumi was always the quiet type. She didn't talk much, didn't argue, and never tried to prove herself to anyone. But being quiet didn't mean she was weak. In fact, her silence had strength. From a young age, people made her feel like she didn't matter. They said she was just a girl, someone who wouldn't go far in life, someone who was only a burden. Those words left scars on her heart, scars she never spoke about. She just kept going, learning how to survive in a world that never clapped for her. The day her husband, Zeno, introduced her to his family, she already knew things wouldn't be easy, and she was right. His sister, Temi, looked at her like she was trash dressed in nice clothes. She didn't smile, didn't welcome her, just stared from head to toe like Lumi was some fake trying to steal her brother's life. Lumi felt it. That look said everything. But instead of showing anger or hurt, Lumi simply smiled, a soft, calm smile that hid the storm inside her, because she had learned one thing in life. When you're real gold, you don't need to shout to shine. Lumi didn't react. She didn't argue. She didn't complain to Zeno. She just kept that moment in her heart, like a quiet seed. People like Temi didn't scare her. She had faced worse. And deep down, she knew one day they'd all see who she really was. Not a gold digger, not a weak girl, but someone who carried quiet power. Someone who didn't need to prove anything, but could change everything. It was the most beautiful night of Lumi's life. The stars were shining, music played softly in the background, and her heart was beating fast. Zeno got down on one knee, his hands shaking a little, and opened a small box. Inside was a custom emerald ring, simple, elegant, and full of meaning. He looked into her eyes and asked her to marry him. Lumi felt tears in her eyes, not because she was nervous, but because no one had ever chosen her this way before. She leaned forward, smiled, and softly said, "Yes." The crowd clapped. People cheered. It felt like a dream. But in the middle of all the joy, one voice cut through like a sharp knife. Zeno's sister, Temi, sat at the front table, looking completely unimpressed. She leaned to the side and said just loud enough for others to hear, "Let's see how long this one lasts. They all come for the money." Her words weren't loud, but they were clear. And just like that, a few people started laughing. Not because it was funny, but because gossip always gets attention. Lumi heard it. Everyone did. She felt that familiar sting in her chest, the same one she felt growing up when people looked down on her. But she didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't let her smile fall. Instead, she gently kissed Zeno's hand, picked up her glass, and raised it high. "To new beginnings," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, and to silent storms. Some didn't understand what she meant, but Temi did. It wasn't just a toast. It was a quiet warning. Lumi wasn't going to fight with words. She was going to let life do the talking, and when it did, it would be loud enough for everyone to hear. That moment at the engagement party changed something in Lumi. She realized she was no longer the girl who needed to stay silent and take every insult. She had entered a new world, one filled with money, power, and people who judged quickly. But she wasn't scared. She had been through worse. And if Temi wanted to see how long she'd last, Lumi was ready to show her, not with shouting, not with drama, but with results. The storm had started, quietly, and Temi didn't even know it yet. After the wedding, things felt like a fairy tale. Lumi looked beautiful in her white gown, and Zeno held her hand like she was the most precious thing in the world. Everyone clapped and smiled, and for a moment, Lumi thought maybe her new family would finally accept her. But life always has other plans. A few days after they returned from their short honeymoon, Zeno sat with Lumi in their living room. He held out a set of papers and said, "I want you to have this. It's 15% of the company shares." Lumi blinked, surprised. Zeno's family owned a successful logistics company. Giving her shares meant something huge. It meant he trusted her. He valued her as more than a wife. Lumi held the documents in her hands and smiled softly. Not because of the money, but because someone finally believed in her. But not everyone was happy. Later that week, there was a board meeting. Lumi joined Zeno just to watch and learn. She stayed quiet, as always. But during the meeting, someone mentioned the updated list of shareholders. That's when Temi saw Lumi's name. Her eyes turned sharp, and before anyone could speak, she slammed her files shut and hissed, "She'll drain us and leave. Watch." The room went quiet. Everyone looked uncomfortable, but Lumi didn't say a word. She simply lowered her eyes and kept her expression calm. That night, Lumi couldn't sleep. She sat in bed with the company documents, legal books, and her laptop. She wasn't scared. She wasn't trying to prove anything. But she knew Temmie's words weren't just insults. They were warnings. Temmie would come for her. She would try to push her out, embarrass her, and make people doubt her. Lumi wasn't going to let that happen. She read every word of the shareholder agreement, every clause, every fine print, every possibility, not because she wanted to fight, but because she wanted to be ready for anything. She took notes, highlighted terms, and began to understand the rules of a world Temmie thought she'd never belong in. She didn't ask Zeno for help. She didn't cry or complain. She just prepared, quietly, carefully, like someone building a secret plan, not to hurt, but to protect. Because Lumi had learned something important. Love is beautiful, but in some families, love alone is not enough. She wasn't holding those shares just to feel important. She was holding them to build something, to belong, and to make sure no one could ever call her just a wife again. And while everyone slept peacefully that night, Lumi was already one step ahead, planning something no one saw coming. It was supposed to be just a simple dinner, a formal company event with board members, top investors, and family. Lumi dressed modestly, sat beside Zeno, and stayed quiet as usual. She knew these gatherings weren't really her space yet, but she wanted to learn. She wanted to listen. Zeno had told her, just be yourself, so she smiled, nodded politely, and paid close attention to every word being said. Then the conversation shifted to business, numbers, company profits, challenges. Everyone was sharing ideas and thoughts. That's when Temmie saw her moment. She looked right at Lumi, with a smirk on her face, and said loudly, I doubt Lumi even knows the difference between gross margin and a grocery bill. The room went silent for a moment, then a few people chuckled. It was an embarrassing moment. Everyone could feel it. The comment wasn't just rude, it was a public insult. But Lumi didn't react the way Temmie expected. She didn't shrink in her seat. She didn't look away or pretend to laugh. Instead, she sat up straight, looked around the table, and calmly started to speak. Actually, she said, her voice firm but soft, the Q2 report showed a drop in profits due to delayed shipments from our Port Harcourt branch. The logistic gap created a 9.7% loss in client satisfaction. And if we don't fix our supply chain contracts by next quarter, we might lose 3 long-term partners. Everyone froze. Temmie, who had been sipping her wine, almost choked. She quickly put her glass down, her face turning red. The board members looked impressed. One of the investors leaned forward and asked, You've read the internal reports? Lumi smiled gently and nodded. Just a housewife thing, she said quietly. Budgeting teaches you how to notice where money disappears. The whole table was stunned. No one expected. Temmie didn't say another word for the rest of the evening. Lumi didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue or try to show off. She simply spoke facts. And in that one moment, she earned the respect that no title could buy. It wasn't just about knowing numbers. It was about showing that she wasn't just sitting there for decoration. She was paying attention. She was learning. And slowly, she was becoming a quiet force. From that night on, nobody ever laughed when Lumi spoke, because now they knew. Behind her soft voice was a sharp mind, and behind that calm smile was a woman who had come not just to stay, but to rise. 1 week after that dinner, Lumi made a move that no one expected. She had been quiet, observing, learning how things worked in the family company. Temmie had insulted her, laughed at her, and tried to make her feel small. But Lumi didn't waste her time arguing. She did something smarter. She went to her lawyer and signed some papers that would temporarily transfer her 15% company shares into Temmie's name. It looked like a gift, like Lumi was stepping back and giving Temmie what she wanted all along: control, recognition, and bragging rights. Lumi even had the documents placed inside a velvet box with a gold seal and had them delivered to Temmie's office. When Temmie opened the box and saw the papers, her eyes lit up. She ran straight to the boardroom, waving the documents proudly. She finally knows her place. Temmie told one of the senior staff members, this company will be in the right hands now. She flaunted those documents everywhere. At meetings, dinners, even in family chats. She acted like she had won, like Lumi had finally bowed down. But what Temmie didn't know was that just minutes before the transfer, Lumi had also filed a legal freeze on those shares. That meant the shares were in Temmie's name, but she couldn't use them. She couldn't sell them. She couldn't vote with them. She couldn't move a single thing. They looked shiny and powerful, but they were useless. When the first bank called to verify a transaction Temi had tried to make, she smiled and said, "Yes, I own the shares now." But then the bank officer informed her, "Ma, the shares are legally frozen. You cannot touch them unless the freeze is lifted by the original owner." Temi's smile faded. "What do you mean frozen?" she asked. But the officer repeated the same thing. "The power is in your name, but it's locked." That evening, Temi stormed into Zeno's house, papers in hand. Lumi was in the living room, calm as ever. Temi raised her voice, asking what kind of joke this was. Lumi stood, walked closer and whispered, "You want power? Then hold it, but don't move it." Temi had nothing to say. She finally understood. Lumi had played a quiet, clever game. She gave Temi exactly what she wanted, on paper, but only on paper. Because real power isn't just about having your name on something. It's about knowing how to control it. After getting the shares, Temi thought she had finally won. She walked into meetings with a new kind of pride, acting like she was now one of the top decision makers in the company. She interrupted people when they spoke, gave strong opinions, and even told some managers to report directly to her. She believed having the shares in her name gave her full power. And everyone around her started acting more careful, thinking Temi now had real control. But very soon, things started to change. The first time Temi tried to use the shares as backup for a business loan, the bank refused. They told her the shares were frozen and couldn't be used as collateral. She didn't understand and thought it was a mistake. She called another bank, tried again, but the answer was the same. Then, in a board meeting, she tried to vote on a major decision. But the company's legal team stopped her and said her shares were not valid for voting at the moment due to restrictions placed on them. She was shocked. "But they're in my name!" she shouted. The room went quiet. No one knew what was going on. She left the meeting feeling confused and embarrassed. Later that week, she went to the finance department and asked them to sell part of the shares so she could invest in another business. They refused. They explained that the shares were under legal control and could not be sold, moved, or even counted in financial decisions without Lumi's approval. It was like holding a beautiful box that was locked, and only Lumi had the key. Temi's face turned pale. She finally started to understand. Lumi hadn't given up power. She had just given Temi the illusion of it. On paper, Temi looked important, but in reality, she couldn't touch a thing. Every move she tried to make led her to a legal wall. No access, no freedom, no real control. She sat alone that evening in her office, reading the papers again and again, hoping she had missed something. But she hadn't. Lumi had done everything by the book, clean, quiet, powerful. And in that moment, Temi realized Lumi wasn't just a soft-spoken wife who married into the family for money. She wasn't here to take. She was here to build, to protect, and to outsmart. Lumi wasn't holding onto the shares for status. She was holding the entire vault. Zeno had no idea what Lumi had done. To him, everything seemed fine. He thought the company was running smoothly, and he believed that giving Lumi those shares was a private matter between husband and wife. He didn't know about the transfer. He didn't know about the freeze. Until one quiet afternoon, while reviewing some company documents on his laptop, he saw something strange in the filings. It said Temi now held Lumi's 15% shares, but with restrictions. Zeno's eyes narrowed. He read through the legal notes carefully. The shares were legally transferred, but they couldn't be used, sold, or voted on. They were frozen. His heart sank a little. He picked up his phone and called Lumi right away. When she answered, her voice was calm, as always. "Hello, love." Zeno didn't waste time. "Lumi, I saw the documents. You transferred your shares to Temi and froze them." His voice was a mix of confusion and surprise. Lumi didn't sound nervous. She didn't even pause. "Yes," she replied simply. "But why would you do that?" Zeno asked again, this time softer, trying to understand. Lumi sat on the couch, holding the phone to her ear, looking out the window. Then she spoke the truth, gently. "Because your sister said I came for the money," she said. "So I let her taste the responsibility, without the freedom." Zeno didn't know what to say. He sat back in his chair, the silence heavy. He wasn't angry, no. He was just ashamed. Ashamed that he didn't notice how Temi had been treating Lumi. Ashamed that his wife had to protect herself without even telling him. ashamed that he hadn't stood between them when he should have. He thought back to all the times Lumi smiled through Temi's rude remarks, the times she sat quietly in meetings, even when others doubted her, the way she never reacted, never caused drama, never made him choose sides. And yet, she had been handling everything, silently and smartly. Lumi wasn't trying to win power. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. She just wanted to be respected. And when she wasn't, she didn't fight with noise. She fought with action. Zeno closed his laptop slowly. He realized that the woman he married wasn't just strong, she was wise. And for the first time, he truly saw her, not just as his wife, but as a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Temi had finally reached her breaking point. After weeks of hitting walls, after being locked out of decisions, and realizing she had no real control over the shares in her name, she showed up at Lumi's house, but not with humility, not with regret. She came with pride still in her voice, pretending to stay strong, even though her eyes showed frustration. She sat on the edge of the chair, her voice lower than usual, trying to act calm. "I want the freeze removed," she said. "Those shares are in my name. I need to use them now." Lumi didn't react with anger or sarcasm. She didn't remind her of the insults or the laughter. She simply stood up, walked to a drawer, and returned with a file in her hand. She placed it on the table in front of Temi and gently slid it across. "There's a way," Lumi said quietly, "but it comes with 2 conditions. Temi raised an eyebrow, confused. "What kind of conditions?" Lumi leaned back, her voice steady. "First, you will attend 6 months of corporate leadership training, real training, with tests, presentations, and evaluations. If you want to be part of the company, you need to earn it, not just carry the name." Temi frowned but said nothing. "Second," Lumi continued, "you will write and sign a public apology, one that acknowledges me, Lumi Zay, as the co-founder of the company's new expansion branch." Temi's mouth opened slightly in shock. She hadn't expected that. An apology? From her? Publicly? It hurt her pride. She looked down at the paper, read it slowly, and stayed silent for a long time. Her fingers tapped the edge of the contract, her heart clearly battling with her ego. But deep down, she knew Lumi had won, not with shouting, not with power move, but with patience, planning, and pure grace. Temi finally picked up the pen and signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Because sometimes, the biggest lessons come not through punishment, but through quiet consequences. Lumi never raised her voice. She never chased revenge. She just held the door, waited, and gave Temi a choice: grow up or stay stuck. And Temi, she chose to grow, even if it stung, even if it came with admitting she was wrong. Because in the end, she saw what everyone else had already started to see. Lumi wasn't just the quiet wife. She was the woman who had earned every piece of her place. And now, she wasn't just in the room, she was setting the rules. After everything that happened, Lumi didn't slow down. In fact, she became even more focused. She didn't go around reminding people what she had done or trying to prove herself with big words. Instead, she let her actions speak for her. Slowly but surely, she became a strong, steady presence in the company. Someone people started to notice and respect. She began by helping out at a small branch that had been losing money for months. Most people had given up on it, but Lumi didn't. She visited the branch quietly, talked to the staff, listened to their problems, and made changes step by step. Within 6 months, that same branch started making profit again. People couldn't believe it. The board called it a miracle, but those who watched her work knew it wasn't magic. It was Lumi's mind and heart combined. She didn't stop there. She launched a mentorship program for young women who wanted to grow in business but didn't have anyone to guide them. She started with just 5 girls, teaching them the basics of leadership, finance, and self-respect. Word spread fast, and soon many more joined. Some of them even got hired into the company later. As Lumi's quiet success grew, people outside the company began to notice. She got invited to speak at 2 big global logistics events, something even some senior board members had never achieved. Her name started showing up in news articles and interviews. Her story was different, and it inspired people. In every email she sent, she now signed her name as Lumi Z, Strategy and Ownership. It wasn't just a title, it was a reminder of how far she had come, from being laughed at and called just a wife, to being one of the strongest minds in the company. And the biggest surprise? Even Temi changed the way she spoke about her. One day at a board meeting, someone asked about the new expansion. Temi smiled and said, "Talk to Lumi. She's not just my brother's wife. She's the spine of this company now." Everyone in the room looked at Lumi with new eyes. She had never begged for attention. She had never shouted to be seen. She just did the work, made smart choices, and stayed true to herself. And in the end, the woman they once called only a wife had quietly become the architect of something far greater: respect. 1 year later, everything had changed, but Lumi hadn't. She was still calm, still graceful, and still quiet. But now, when she walked into a room, people stood up. When she spoke, they listened. Not because she shouted, but because her words carried weight. She had earned something that couldn't be bought or handed down. She had earned respect. Even after all the victories, Lumi never once gloated. She never threw her success in anyone's face. She didn't remind people of how wrong they were or how low they once looked at her. She simply continued being herself, focused, kind, smart, strong. She knew that true power didn't need noise, and she didn't come to the family for revenge. She came to build something better for herself, for others, and even for those who once doubted her. On Temi's birthday, Lumi did something unexpected. She sent a small gift, a glass paperweight in a simple black box. It was beautiful and clear, shaped like a diamond, but it wasn't the shape that made Temi stop. It was the message engraved inside. It read, "May what you hold always have weight." Temi held it in her hands for a long time. No one else was around, but she knew exactly what that message meant. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. A reminder that power means nothing if you don't know how to carry it. A reminder that Lumi had given her a chance to feel what power looked like and what it cost. Temi looked out the window, holding the paperweight, and took a deep breath. For the first time, she didn't feel angry. She felt humbled, because Lumi hadn't just frozen some company shares to make a point. She had unfrozen something bigger: respect. And not just from Temi, from the whole family, from the company, from the world watching her rise. Lumi didn't come for the money. She didn't come to play games. She came to grow, to build, to stand, and she did. Now, her name stood on company boards, on business articles, and in rooms where real decisions were made. But most importantly, her name stood for something real: legacy. If you felt that, don't scroll without sharing. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't weak. They're just waiting for the right moment to move. Tag someone who needs to remember: respect isn't given, it's built. Follow for more powerful stories that remind us you don't need to be loud to lead. You just need to be wise.